Hey, Kate, what did you eat last night?
I had something I don't eat very often, which was steak. A friend of mine took me. We have a steakhouse here in Chicago called Gibson's, and they have this one sort of special high-end cut. And there's this one friend that always takes me there, and he always insists. He's like, let's get those steaks. And it's so good. And I usually only eat grass-fed beef, and I don't think theirs is grass-fed, and I still eat it anyway because it's that delicious.
Oh,
And
nice. It's
yeah.
good to have good meat.
Oh, it's so good. And I had that and a baked potato, and then I came home and fell asleep. And I had some kind of delicious, like, peach mint julep, actually, which was tasty. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was very good. How about you?
I got together with my friend Emmy, and we just had this really nice day planned. We were going to go see a movie, then go to our favorite French cafe, and then see another movie.
That
And
sounds
so
like the
we
best
met at,
day
like,
ever.
Right?
Yeah.
We need more of them. So we met at like 2:30, so it was after lunch, and we both got to the theater and we're really hungry. And we were debating because we wanted to have a snack, but we didn't want it to ruin the dinner at the cafe.
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, we were most concerned about having the really good popcorn that's available at the second show at like 7:30. So it was just so absurd because we got into this whole conversation right there in front of the guys at the concession stand about what snack should we have. We shouldn't have the popcorn here because we'll have popcorn later, but we have to have a small snack. But we can't ruin the dinner that's coming in between the two movies. So we basically
These are very important considerations.
Thank you for supporting me.
Absolutely.
So I'm like, all right, let's just get a thing of Twizzlers. So we get a thing of Twizzlers. And
Good choice. Good choice.
Always good. We go in, we start eating the Twizzlers, and we were seeing Finding Dory, and there were 7,000
I'm so
previews.
jealous.
It's a sweet movie. And the previews, and the Twizzlers didn't even last the previews. So I'm like, oh my God, I need something else. So like one of the previews, I just run out of the theater and I hear Emmy start laughing, and I just go and get the biggest box of Junior Mints.
Awesome choice again, I must say. Those are my favorite
you.
movie theater chocolate candy things.
And they refrigerate them and sometimes freeze them now at theaters, so you
Oh.
can get them cold. So I come back, and the Junior Mints barely made it through the previews into the movie, so we did that. And then we went to our French cafe where we basically got the best French onion soup ever, and a salad, and some mushrooms. And then we went to the second movie and got the best popcorn ever. It's just made so fresh, so sweet.
Did they use real butter?
They use real butter.
That's the thing, man.
And I always go up and I'm like, popcorn, please. And they're like, you want butter? And then I'm like, yeah, enough to kill a horse. And they just stare at me. What I love, though, is last night, the woman that took my order relayed that to the man that was actually getting the popcorn. Yeah, a small popcorn with enough butter to kill a horse. They were just like, okay. They didn't blink.
That is hilarious. And was it indeed enough butter to kill a horse?
It was. I'd never gotten that much butter. It was so terrible. We had it on the armrest in between us. They were like, why is this armrest so wet and gooey? I'm like, oh, there's so much butter seeping out of the bag.
Oh, gross.
This armrest was so...
That's the moment you're glad you weren't putting it on your jeans. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Good times, Kate. Good times.
Yeah. So we're going to shift gears. We're actually doing an unusual kind of episode today, so we hope you enjoy.
So up until an hour ago, Kate and I were all set to record an episode talking about weight loss versus weight management. But there's one more straw that fell and broke both of our backs. So we've just been in our own personal conversations. We've been just talking about all the really challenging, terrible things that have been happening both in the world, and just how hard that is to process. And neither of us really felt like talking about weight loss and weight management today. Mm-hmm. So we're going to bring you something a little bit different. We're just going to talk about some of the things that have been going on in the world, and really just how we're processing them and how we're going to try and process them with, more kindness and more positive thoughts.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. And what do we do when the world falls apart? Like, what do we do?
Great expression. Yeah.
Yeah. And there is, I'll just say it now because it's going to come up later. There's this marvelous book, if you guys aren't aware of it, called When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times by Pema Chodron. And we're going to be giving you some counsel from that book later in the podcast today and talking about some suggestions from that perspective, because we are desperate. I will say I am desperate for ideas of what to do because I'm feeling so overwhelmed by the insanity that is our world right now.
And one of the things Kate and I really love about this podcast is, particularly since we've been doing it for so long, that it's starting to provoke a conversation between us and listeners. So as always, feel free to respond and jump in and let us know your thoughts. And of course, you can do that by just sending an audio recording to You Won't Believe What I Ate at gmail.com, or you can find our website, youwon'tbelievewhatIate.com. But yeah, please just be part of the conversation. We want to play it on air. We want to hear different points of views. And yeah, we just want more options and opinions on, how to move through this crazy world.
Totally. Yeah. And you can email us too. Yeah. So yeah, send us thoughts. That's great.
One of the things I was thinking of is just like when things do fall apart, like how that makes me feel and why I become so unanchored. And it's really challenging. Like, I'm just like, there are some things that happen and I'm like, oh, whatever. But a lot of things that have happened lately, they just really get to my core and they uproot me. Yeah. And like, I don't even realize it on a conscious level sometimes. But then I'm like, why am I feeling this way? I'm like, yeah, oh, right. It's because of all this crazy stuff that's been happening.
Yeah, I feel like the whole last 6 to 8 months, I've been especially vulnerable. And part of it, I think, has been because of the world and the stuff that's going on. And I think a lot of us are really more sensitive than we may understand, and are sensitive to the energies of what's going on around us. And it's so hard in an urban, like so many of us live in an urban American environment. I think most of our listeners are, well, not all of us are urban, I guess, but all of us know what it is to be urban. And it's hard to walk around being receptive and responsive. That's not always how one survives. Like every day there's a story about someone who got stabbed in the neck on the Red Line, which is our subway system. Yeah, exactly. So it's hard to just sort of go through the world being like, oh, I am open and receptive. So that balance.
While singing,
that's a sure way to get stabbed in the neck, I think, on the Red Line. But I think, yeah, that balance is tricky. Yeah, so we don't want to spend a huge amount of energy talking about what sucks, but we do feel that for the context, we need to kind of enumerate the things, because I have a list of 7 things that have happened in 2.5 weeks that have been horrifying, and have sort of any one of them is enough to make me want to go to bed and like not get up. And so,
forever.
Yeah, exactly. So the first one started about 2.5 weeks ago, was the 6-month verdict for this Stanford rape guy. Do you know what I'm talking about, Rick?
Yeah, I came to that late because I sort of saw it, but I knew how bad it was and I just couldn't process it. So I'm like, I'm just going to put that aside because, I can just let that one slide because nothing else will ever happen that'll make me deal.
Exactly. Right. I have work to do.
I'm going to skip that one.
Totally. So the victim wrote this amazing letter that was all over Facebook and was it was so smart and brave and awesome, and I'm so glad she did it, because I think that's one of the reasons it got as much attention as it did. But basically, guy raped a girl, blamed it on college drinking, and because he's a good swimmer, he got 6 months in jail because the judge said it could, quote, negatively impact his life, close quote, if he had a more severe sentence. So That provoked outrage and horror. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing, I'm just going to go because this one is a Chicago thing, so you don't have this one, is there was a theater company that was profiled in the Chicago Reader, which is our free paper. And there was this huge, amazing, long article that took years to write, basically revealing somebody that had been abusive in sexual, mental, physical, emotional ways to many people over 20 plus years. And the thing that it brought out was not just about this one theater company, although they really became the face of that, but it's sort of the culture of abuse in theater that I think is super upsetting. The whole idea of the casting couch. People always joke about, the casting couch, and la la la. But really, it's a real thing, and it's horrible. And
it's still going on.
And the idea that people are told, to do real theater, you have to let me actually beat you up on stage. And people don't people, it's horrible. It's horrible. And so it's still a thing. And hopefully this coming to light is going to change it. An organization has come out of it called Not in Our House that's going to change it. And it's amazing and wonderful. And still, it was devastating.
And it was really one of those things that's just another example of what people are willing to do for what they want, right? They want something so much, they crave it so much, and they're willing to do really whatever someone tells them that they should, even if it goes against what they probably know is true. So that's sort of, I think, why we were both sort of or I was also caught up about that too.
Totally. And artists are so vulnerable, and it's about being vulnerable, and the abuse of that vulnerability is especially painful.
Yeah.
Then for me, before we even get to like the biggest, most obvious one that's going to come up next, but there was one more before that, which was Hillary Clinton became the presumptive nominee, and the vitriol and hatred from the disappointed Bernie fans, and the threat, the very real threat of them allowing Trump into office because they're angry is so horrifying that I don't know what to do about it, because Trump is scary, but what's scarier than Trump is all the Americans that support Trump. But then what's scarier than that is the Bernie fans who might allow Trump into office knowingly. Like the Trump fans, I feel like maybe are just ignorant, but I feel like the Bernie people are doing it maliciously and on purpose, potentially to create some kind of riot that they feel would be better than Hillary Clinton as president. And that to me is also deeply distressing.
Yeah, I agree. And the word you use, vitriol, is really right. And there's something very active about it that, Bernie Sanders supporters are doing. And I do find it upsetting, because I do think part of what this whole thing that happens in this political game, is 2 people run or 3 people run, someone wins, right? Someone drops out. And yes, you begrudgingly move along, but you don't send out this ridiculous amount of just like, for lack of a better word, sort of hate.
Yeah.
Towards, another person. And this is the whole thing that always I get caught up about, is just because someone else gets their way or someone else wins or whatever, you don't turn that into hate. You don't turn that into vitriol.
Yeah, totally. And the idea that our society could be taken down by our own people, because that's it. I mean, I could have gone either way with Hillary or Bernie, in a lot of ways. Yeah. Like we don't have different beliefs in so many ways. And I think if Trump gets elected, it's the end of the world, kind of. And so I feel like the fact that our own people could make that happen knowingly and on purpose and maliciously is even more upsetting to me than the stupid people who just don't know better.
Agree. It's like the calls are coming from inside the house. I'm like, uh-oh, time to get out.
Right. And then there's like the big one, which you should talk about.
Is the shooting in Orlando.
Yeah.
At the Pulse nightclub, which was, for me personally, just rocked to my core, because, I was lulled into this place ever since gay marriage came into our conscious as a real thing. You do get lulled into this place of like, ooh, progress. It feels so good. You feel safe. Plus the fact that these places for young gay men and women, they're havens. It's where you go to feel safe, even nowadays, because it's still very hard to go into a straight club or a straight place, right? Or a straight bar and if you go in with a partner and still not be looked at askance or weird, it still happens. So this place, ones that are specifically for gay men and women, it's just a safe haven. And then to have that ripped out from you, it's really just shocking to my core. Like it really just sort of pulls everything out from under me, because I thought, oh, this is the whole thing about progress. It lulls you into thinking that everything's okay.
And the whole thing being pinned on terrorism when it was actually even more horrific than that, which is just a gay man's self-loathing because he grew up in a world where that wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And that created that. That part of it is even more mind-blowing to me.
One of the things that stuck out for me during all that is when they would be interviewing survivors or even just friends of survivors, and they would be talking about, say, there was this one couple that sort of got a lot of airtime, that had been together. They're only like 20 or 22. They'd already been together for 2 or 3 years, and they were planning on getting married. And you see that, and you see the loss of dreams. And what was so weird for me is that when I was younger and I was coming out, like, those dreams weren't even possible. No one thought about, like, you know, actually getting married. I think a lot of gay men just like, oh, maybe I can do a best guest spot on Ellen or something. You know, that's the highest thing you're ever going to get in your culture. But the fact that, you know, they just have a deeper level of dreams that I felt like were swiped out from underneath of them. Because I'm like, I never had those growing up.
Then we have our representatives having to have a 60s style sit-in on the floor just to try to get their colleagues to do their fucking job. Like, I don't understand why those people are allowed to just be like, no, we're not going to do our job, and that's acceptable.
That was rich.
Who can do that? Who among us can do that? But that's what it feels like the Republicans have been doing this whole time. They're like, we're just going to stop any sort of governance from happening as long as there's a Democrat in office. I don't understand why that's allowable.
Agreed. And to me, that's another thing that really gets to the core of my feelings or my stability, because I think here's the thing, what most people, I think, either consciously or unconsciously pick up about that is that very little is getting done for the good of people. And
right.
That's a prime example of it.
Yeah, nobody cares about people. I don't know what they care about, their own agenda, but even that seems mysterious.
Yeah.
And then today, last night and this morning, is the Brexit, which is that the United Kingdom voted by a small margin to leave the European Union, which is going to cause disastrous ramifications in the world economy and for England itself. And I'm English, and that's just heartbreaking. And it's a horrific thing. And the most horrific thing is, my understanding is, the vote to leave was based on fear-mongering and racism and xenophobia. And I understand immigration has a limit. It is a small country. I mean, it's the size of what, like Indiana or something. It is a small space. And so there is a limit to how many humans can fit in that small space. But I don't think that was really the issue. And it just heralds, like, it's how we could get somebody that frightening into office here. And now the prime minister's resigned, and now all these people are coming out going, well, I voted without knowing the facts. I voted emotionally, and now I regret it. And I wish we could have a do-over. There's been all these articles about that now, all these interviews of people suddenly now looking up, well, what is the European Union? And having an emotional response like we did with Ralph Nader, and look what happened there, and voting our, quote, conscience, and then being regretful because we didn't realize the ramifications. And I feel like if you can't count on the English people to be civilized, what hope is there?
We've lost everything.
If they're not going to sit down and have a cup of tea while they're colonizing the world, then what do we have to ask for?
We have nothing, Kate. I have to say, when that started happening, I started getting these emails from the two companies that, you know, just manage my retirement and my money and all of that stuff. And they're trying to just contextualize everything. And I couldn't really read them. I just saw them coming in. And it really triggers for me what it can do to the economy. It really just triggered to me my whole fear that I'm going to be like 80 and working in a drive-through at like the local Dairy Queen because I can't afford anything. Not that there's anything wrong with working at the drive-through in a Dairy Queen, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's my bag lady thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I always had this secret thing that I could always move to England and they would take care of me because I was born there and they would have to. But now they're just fucked too. So like that's my safety net is now just gone.
The other two things I was thinking about when we decided to do this was one is sort of didn't really register that much, but in the pulse of everything that's happening was before the Orlando shooting, there was that singer that was on The Voice or something.
Yes.
That was shot and killed and by, you know, just at a meet and greet with a fan.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Orlando thing happened. And then that poor boy that got taken away by the alligator in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And all I remember watching this one report, and it was sort of terrible, but basically the sheriff of Orlando, you just see him that first night when that singer gets shot. He's just standing there so brave, and he's like, our community's struggling, but we will overcome. And then they just cut to the clip where he's there at the Orlando shooting, and he's like, our community is strong. We will overcome. It's terrible. I know. I was sort of laughing. It was so absurd. And you cut to the poor scene when that poor sheriff is responding to the boy who got pulled off by an alligator. He's like, We are a strong community. We will overcome. I'm like,
Jesus
I thought I had a
Christ.
rough week.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah. I know. There's not a day that's gone by that there hasn't been a shooting. So, I mean, the gun thing, I mean, that's just absurd. Like,
Yeah.
there's that. And then the very last thing is today, the final, like, cherry on the soda for me was less important in a global scheme for many people, but George Lucas has been trying to donate a museum to the city of Chicago of narrative art, which is an amazing thing that sort of separates pop culture from high art and is a museum of all these different kinds of art, including film and digital media and interactive stuff, like a groundbreaking, fascinating thing. Because, you know, George Lucas is no dummy about how to make things cool. So he has some ideas.
Totally.
And he and his family have been trying to give this museum to the city of Chicago for zero taxpayer dollars. All these jobs, all this stuff, and this little Friends of the Park thing keeps suing them, being like, well, it would be in this parking lot that's very important near the lake. We cannot have development on this parking lot. There's no way we can allow you to build a giant park and a museum in this parking lot area. And so finally, after a year and a half or whatever it's been, Lucas has been like, okay, we give up. We can't continue to fight this in court. We're going to California.
Really?
So now we've lost that too. And I know that's not important in the scheme of things the way other things are, but it is important. Art is important. Art is important. And we've lost that in my city. And so it's just the last thing. I'm like, Jesus, people. Come on.
That is upsetting.
Yeah.
That is really upsetting.
Thank you.
Like, I'm stunned.
Right.
My jaw is down towards the base of my microphone.
Exactly. Yeah, so these are the things that have happened in 2.5 weeks that are making it hard to function.
Right.
So now we turn to what the hell do we do?
Well, always first step, recognize, realize, right, what's going on. And then we can move forward from there. Mm-hmm. And for me, I really, when we started this conversation, that thing I said was very true. When the Stanford verdict came down about that Stanford rape, I was literally like, oh, I don't need to deal with that one. And that's sort of how I move through the world sometimes. But when you have a couple of weeks like we've had, it's so hard, even if you're not fully engaged, even if you're not following every situation intensely, it's still there, particularly nowadays, right? Because it's hard to escape consuming information on any of this stuff. So it's there. It literally gets to the fabric of your stability, I feel.
Yeah. It does. And it gets really easy to dig your heels in about how right you are. And so in the hour and a half or whatever it's been since we decided to talk about this today, I paged through that book that I mentioned earlier, When Things Fall Apart, and I have some thoughts from that I'm going to throw out for us to discuss. And the one that jumps out at me as the most significant for myself personally, because I am guilty of, like, this is all stuff that I'm like, oh, okay, this is comforting because I can change this behavior. I'm so angry and I feel so... whatever. So here's the quote. When we hold on to our opinions with aggression, no matter how valid our cause, we are simply adding more aggression to the planet, and violence and pain increase. Cultivating non-aggression is cultivating peace.
God, that's beautifully said. And it really
Pema
speaks to
Chodron,
this.
baby.
Gotta love her. Gotta love her. And this really speaks to this whole idea, right? Of when stimulus happens, when something happens, that time before your reaction, right? How are you going to respond? Because there's always that initial reaction that happens that we all have. And how do you really, this is what I'm thinking is for myself, how do I really just sort of make sure I'm taking a moment and having the reaction that I think is right, not the reaction that I want to have, right? Which is where a lot of people lose it sometimes, I think, because we just want to go with the reaction that instinctually comes up.
That's how Britain left the EU. It was an emotional knee-jerk response. It wasn't a thought-out response, exactly. And so meditation, which we come back to again and again. I mean, it was the very first episode of this podcast was about meditation, and we've talked about it over and over. And so here we go again. Meditation is about opening and relaxing about whatever arises so that we're better able to meet this stuff from that space.
Beautifully said, right? And it solves a lot of problems because one of the things we have to put into practice, and gosh, when we really think about how many times we've said it so far, this is the big practice. To put it into place, put it into practice when you need to, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another thing is that the idea is to release judgment and accept what is, and then we can go from there. And I'm totally not there yet with these things. This whole list of things I just gave you, I am still judging them. And I understand that that is not helpful. And yet that's what I'm doing. I'm judging them as wrong. And I am right. And that is not the way to peace.
No.
You know?
Right.
And oh my God, it's really hard for me not to be in that space. It's really hard for me, especially when I'm so clearly right.
Divorce. Well, if you didn't say it about yourself, I was going to.
That I was right or that I was always judgy?
No, that you're right.
Thank you.
Hello, we're friends because if you're right, then I'm right.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. And it's about the renunciation of the hope that our experience could be different than what it is. Disappointment only comes from expectations that something should be different than what it is. And if we can just be with what is, we will not be so pissed.
Excuse me while I go throw myself off my balcony.
Right?
Because here's the thing, and this is really, and she said this before, Pema Chodron, which is this whole idea is where does suffering come from, Kate, right? It comes from not being able to see things different from how they are, wanting them to be different, expecting them to be different. And, this just happened to me again this week where I was with someone in a relationship, and this idea that you just want something to be different than it has been for years, rather than accepting what is. And it always reminds me of this great thing I learned. And I always learned this from my parents, this idea of stop fighting for the relationship you want and just accept and enjoy the relationship you have. And that's still one of the hardest things for me to do. And I apply that to all this other stuff. Stop fighting. You got to stop fighting so much about what you want and the thing you think you should have and really just sort of see things as they are.
Yeah. And that suffering is, I don't know if I made this up or if I read this somewhere many, many years ago, but I might have made this up, but I'm sure I didn't, but whatever. So suffering and pain are different because pain is just an experience that we all have. And so all of this shit in the last 2.5 weeks are painful things. Suffering is a resistance to the pain. I think if we just allowed the pain to be pain, it wouldn't be suffering.
Agreed, 100%. And this goes back to the very essence of meditation, right? You have to be okay and just let what needs to come up. And then from there, you can move forward.
And the one addiction that I think most human beings share is that we are addicted to avoiding pain.
Ugh, totally, Kate.
And that so many of the things we do, whether it's eating poorly or drinking too much or drugs or sex or whatever, or gambling, whatever our addictions may be, a lot of them, probably most of them, are geared around avoiding pain. Whereas if we were just like, oh, look, that's pain. Like that's purple or that's a glass. Yeah. Like if we could just see it for what it is and be with something for what it is, instead of judging it as bad, that would be really helpful. And the thing that kills me about this is that I've been through periods in my life where I've been able to do that. And so I can taste it. I know what it feels like. And so the fact that I've lost it and can't find it again makes me just feel like an asshole. Like, right. How can I not be? Because Pema Chodron is like, well, the moment I realized that, and then she became this amazing, like, prophet. And I'm like, well, the moment I realized that, apparently, I lived that way for a year or two and then went back to not doing it.
I ate a few bag of chips along the way too.
Right. Then there was the Cheetos. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
What you said just makes me think of this idea I always think a lot about in this world, that there's like suffering that we all have to go through. Like, to me, like, obviously death of someone you love is pain. You know, that's real suffering. And paying taxes, that can be suffering. And election seasons, right? And that whole difference between, you know, what is necessary suffering that you just have to go through because of embodiment, because we're here. But the very thing we're talking about, which is unnecessary suffering, that's what this whole idea of how do you really avoid the unnecessary suffering. And that doesn't always mean things are going to be easy, but it does sort of encourage you to ask the question of, how do I really not add on? What you had said so beautifully in the beginning, like, I think you said something like this: how do you not add on any more suffering than there already is?
I'm going to throw out some other quotes. When things fall apart, we are nailed to the present moment. The moment is the teacher. Am I going to practice peace or add aggression in the world? So moments like this are a teaching moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. God, she's so good.
Here's another good one. All of this is motivation to... Oh, I might have paraphrased some of these. She probably didn't say all of this. But so anyway, so this is a combination of her and me. All of this is motivation to live an insightful, compassionate life. That leads to tenderness for the human race. We become more tamed and reasonable for the sake of other people.
God, read that last sentence again. That's so great.
We become more tamed and reasonable for the sake of other people.
Yeah.
And that's what the internet destroys. The internet is the antithesis of that. We become just hostile and bitchy because we can, and we don't care about the other person. We don't think about the other person because they're not a person. They're a line. Yeah. They're a piece of black ink on our computer screen. Right.
You hit post and it's done. You don't have to think about it. There's very real ramifications. If there are, you probably don't know. Sometimes you don't even know that you've said something so offensive that you've been unfriended.
Here's another good one. To live is to be willing to die over and over again. Death is wanting to hold on to what you have and to have every experience confirm you and congratulate you and make you feel completely together.
Lordy, help me. That's a big one.
Do you need a cool glass of lemonade?
I need a cool glass of lemonade to calm my fevered brain. Makes me think of, since we've been doing this podcast, I had not been on Facebook until I did the podcast. And, this is part of Kate coaching me, is that we're getting ready to launch the podcast. And, every 2 weeks she'd be like, dude, you're going to have to join Facebook, right? And I'm like, I know. And I would sort of like hang up and just scream to myself.
I don't blame you.
That started a good year out, actually, even before this. But I do think about this whole thing that happens with Facebook is you just put this stuff up there. There's not a whole lot of sensitivity about it. And you put it up there because why? You want it to be, we think it has meaning. We think it matters. And it does, right? Because people respond. And you really get caught up in this idea that everything you do matters. Now, I'm not someone that goes online and posts every little thing I do. But there is that dynamic that exists that, oh my gosh, I had a bowel movement today. Isn't that exciting? And people are like, oh my God, 30 likes. And then you can post something really wonderful about take action on this really great humanitarian cause about animals. And like, no one sees it.
Right? Yeah. Welcome to social media.
Heaven help me.
Here's another good quote. We want to be perfect, and all we see is our imperfections. That's the quote. And then my thing is that this is a paraphrase part, that when you really see that is when, and then this is back to her, that is when the sword turns into a flower.
Oh, God. That's beautiful.
And it's just about looking and being and seeing and relaxing into the moment and seeing, oh, I wish I were better. This is really upsetting. And instead of having a knee-jerk reaction to it or whatever, just seeing it for what it is, does things that are helpful. And Rick and I have been talking, like, we're going to provide more information about meditations and stuff like that in the weeks and months to come, and more specific things that we can do about this. Today is more of a global conversation in that.
One of the things I think I want to really, this whole, when we decided to do this podcast today and just sort of talk about these things, one of the things I didn't do, right, when I realized that I was stressed out or overwhelmed with all this stuff, particularly this morning, is I didn't fall back into my meditation practice. Because my meditation practice has really been spot on, but for the last 2 days and for the last week, like, because I'm a little bit more rushed, it's not as long as it usually has been. And then it just hasn't been able to happen because I've had to, and I usually do it in the morning, and I have to get up so early that I haven't been able to do it in the mornings. And I know, and the pull, it keeps pulling me back. It's like, Rick, go meditate, go sit. But I just didn't, even though I could have, but I just didn't. And so it just makes me think this whole idea of the practice, right? This whole idea of what are we going to practice here? And for me, what I want to move through this weekend with and next week is when these things come up, as they will keep coming up, obviously, because of social media and the news. And if anything else happens, I really, really want to embrace this practice of making sure I sit with it soon. You know what I mean? And not putting that off. So I can really just sort of be with what's there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Because if we're compassionate with ourselves, then we can be compassionate with others. And if we change the habits of our mind and accept what is and see it, it will enable us to lose that sort of aggressive perspective. And I know that right now I'm allowing myself to be hardened rather than softened by the events of the world. And that's not the right way to go. So I need to create a practice that's more consistent, that enables me to soften into it and relax and realize that the path is the goal.
Yeah.
And allow it to be a teaching moment for me to get back into that place of, what is it Gandhi said? Be the change you want to see in the world. It really does start. Change does start from within us. So that's the thing I can do now. I mean, I'm signing the petitions. I'm calling the people. I'm doing my political activism within reason. But then beyond that, this is where I need to go.
What you said, Kate, is so important. What you said was so beautiful. And it just made me think about really clarifying when we're, at least from my perspective, when we're talking about not hardening and softening, not being aggressive, but love, that doesn't mean, right, we're not going to take action. It doesn't mean you don't have opinions. It doesn't mean that you're not going to fight for a particular change. Mm-hmm. It is the very idea, right, about how you go about it. Because sometimes I feel like this whole sort of, peace and love movement, right, it gets a bad rap. Mm-hmm. Because they think, all we want to do is let down the borders, let everyone in. So I think that's just an important thing to remember as we all sort through this, is your response and how you respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we don't have softness in our own hearts, we can't have it for other people. And then, right.
Agreed.
All right. So next episode, we will return to more regularly scheduled programming.
I love you called it a session. It does sound a little bit like therapy to me.
Our next session. I see clients a lot.
Patients.
Yeah. In our next session, we'll do this. But let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of.